Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and being from Boston, I feel like I'm qualified to say this, but today's guest is wicked smart. He not only has had an incredible career up to this point, but I love that he is now one of us. He's a fellow entrepreneur who's passing on his brilliance to young people to inspire them to pursue a career in the STEM industry while he's building a business that's impacting people all across the US and beyond. Let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Jared DeCoste. Now, Jared has a wealth of accolades. He received his PhD in 2009 from Binghamton University in materials chemistry. He was a professor of chemistry at Ball State University. He's been a chemist in the US Army in their Chemical Biological Center, raising to the position of Chief Scientist for the Protection Division. He was named the 2018 Maryland Chemist of the Year by the American Chemical Society. All of this stuff is right in line with his accomplishments. It's all backed up with really impressive accolades because he's been published in more than 60 peer-reviewed articles. He's been cited more than 7,000 times. We're a ways away from 7,000 episodes here on the show. But most of all, directly relevant to today's episode, he started his company XpeRience Science in 2022 after initial success in creating immersive experiences. So today's topic is really going to be at the intersection of science and a career background in science with entrepreneurship, with really cool technology, with serving and inspiring others. I'm excited about this one. Let's dive straight into my interview with Jared DeCoste. All right, Jared, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I didn't know you're from Boston. I was born in Boston as well, so that's a great, fun tidbit.
No way. Very cool. Yeah, it's crazy. I know we were talking geography before we hit record here today, but it's always cool to be linked to New England, where my roots very much are, although I'm a terrible New Englander, Jared. I can't do cold weather.
You know, there's something to be said for shoveling once a year, but that's it.
No. I'll watch YouTube videos of shoveling. It'll just bring back all my childhood memories. But Jared, honestly, we're so excited to have you here on the show today. First things first, I'd love for you to take us beyond the bio. I know there's so much that has gone into your professional career up to this point. So who's Jared? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
You know, ultimately, what it comes down to is I am a scientist. Like, that's what I am good at. And we always have to start with what we're good at. I'm a STEM professional. I thought for years I wanted to go into medicine and biology. Ultimately, chemistry is what became my passion and what I loved. After I got my PhD, I went on to love to teach and inspire others. Whenever I was still being a scientist, a researcher, doing my own projects, I really always wanted to find ways to give back, work on STEM outreach and things along those lines. So when I could find ways within my career to bring in young scientists into my lab, go out and give talks to elementary school, middle school, high school kids, that was a real important piece for me. But what I'm really excited to talk to you guys about today is not just what I love and what I'm good at, but ultimately how I was able to turn that into an entrepreneurial exercise and really kind of get that reason for being and really get that, as the Japanese call it, the ikigai, and understand where that overlap is and how to really monetize that and find that white space. So really throughout my career, I was a successful scientist, as you kind of pointed out there. But really now I'm moving beyond that into the next stage of my career into really how to give back and to really understand what is it the world can use from what I've learned over the years, and ultimately turn that into a business, into different areas that are worthwhile to the scientific community. And ultimately, my number one goal is to bring folks into the scientific community and the STEM fields who haven't felt like there were career paths for them. And what is interesting is with good training and good backgrounds into these up and coming fields, STEM fields, folks who may not have felt like they were an A student in science in high school can find that there is a place for them in the scientific community and within ultimately the biomanufacturing community and the bioeconomy, which is exploding and going to be probably the largest growing sector over the next 50 years.
Yeah, Jared, I love that overview, especially because I'll be transparent with you. Part of our conversation here today is laced with my excitement in immersive experiences because I'm an early adopter to the Apple Vision Pro. And I will say that when I got to see a human heart directly in front of me, I immediately FaceTimed my sister, who is a veterinarian. And I said, Christina, this is crazy. And she said, yeah, it's amazing that you get to see that. Whereas previously, I just got to read about it in a book. And so I think that technology is changing. You pointed out the academic world is changing. And where I really want to kick this off, Jared, is that with that precursor to this conversation, you decided to be a part of this revolution. You decided to be a change agent in this space. Where along the way did you realize, you know what, entrepreneurship, starting a business and enacting change through that vehicle is the way that I want to go?
You know, what's really funny is I don't think I always worked in this, what I will call an entrepreneurial science space. So if you're a scientist and a principal investigator, someone who leads a laboratory and different projects, you're actually entrepreneurial by nature. So even though I was working for the government, I had to constantly come up with new ideas, pitch them, find someone to fund them, and then execute on them, and then convince someone that I had done good work on the back end. Well, that might not be monetizing that on the back end. It got a lot of those skills, and we always said where we worked that we were very entrepreneurial. I thought 5 years ago I was kind of on a career path of working for the government for forever. I was honestly set in my ways. I could work there forever and make a fantastic career, and honestly have a very fulfilling career. But I was really lacking this kind of like one piece of it, which was the way to really give back and do the teaching, which is really ultimately what I love. So that was missing. And when I saw an opportunity, a lot of things obviously had to fall into place, but I was really able to grasp it. So this is kind of going to probably be a long story about how it all came together. But ultimately, I met my two business partners, Dan and Tom, while I had a random email come across my desk. So in May of 2021, I saw this email come into my inbox that basically said, there's this DoD STEM competition called eCyberMission. I had already heard of it. I didn't really know much about it. But during COVID, they were looking for a new way to engage students. And this was utilizing virtual reality and doing a STEM outreach activity. They didn't really know what they were going to do at this point in time, but there was going to be a Zoom meeting to basically talk this through. One thing that's really important to know about me is if someone has a good idea and they have a meeting, I'm almost always willing to take it. I want to kind of see what the new things are. If it's about STEM outreach, I'm going to be there even more. And when it's about something that I don't really know about, like virtual reality that I kind of know is cool, and I wasn't yet at that point an adopter of the technology, I just wanted to hear what folks had to say. So at the end of the day, I met Tom and Dan on this call. They were the ones pitching the project to eCyberMission. And they were looking for a scientist to basically help them develop what was going on in the lab and tell a story. So I loved this. They really wanted to go to middle school students, learn how to tell a story about what it was that was going on in the laboratory that was related to something in the real world. Luckily, there were some things going on in my research that made a lot of sense to kind of to tap in this area. And we were able to basically turn what we do in our lab into a really fun 12 to 15 minute VR experience for students. When I got to be involved in the development, understand more about production, understand more about the VR technology in general, I started to see opportunity. And it wasn't just in this VR STEM outreach, which I loved, it was in some other parts of my career, which were related around synthetic biology and biomanufacturing, which was an area I'd entered in about 2017 or so, which I had seen there being a real need for workforce development. This workforce development piece that was needed was because the demand within this area, this growing sector, was just far outpacing the number of trained folks that were out there. There were quite a number of people with PhDs and master's degrees, but ultimately the folks who will be running this sector and in the manufacturing space are going to be technicians and people who really have a vocation, and there isn't a good way to train them at this point. Schools like community colleges and even four-year institutions have to invest a lot of money into the actual equipment if they want to train the students on these. And actually, to go back to your point about your sister's story with being able to see the beating heart, where these students were learning at this point in time was just in the books, right? They were getting lectures, they were getting the background, but they weren't getting the hands-on experience they needed because the schools couldn't afford the equipment or the people to maintain them or even have the expertise. And ultimately, that's where virtual reality can come in. It's to meet the theoretical background, which we usually read about in books or see in lectures, and have it meet the hands-on experience in a virtual environment and be able to lay those things over one another. Ultimately, we saw this as an opportunity and wanted to figure out how could we not only monetize this, but really bring this as a need to the community. So it's now something the community needs. It was something that I loved. It's something that I'm pretty good at with science, but we needed to figure out how to monetize it. And that may have been one of the biggest hurdles that we had to overcome at the end of the day. But luckily, we're there at this point in time and being able to be in the early stages of development and have the development funded for our exciting new endeavor.
Yeah, Jared, I really appreciate that overview and the backstory because it brings to light something that I think we need to talk about more societally. I think we do a good job of talking about it within the world of entrepreneurship, but I think as a society, we often underestimate the power of business when it comes to being a change agent. And here you are talking about monetization, and a lot of people, it's funny, I think societally we're taught to not talk about monetization, but fortunately we're here on an entrepreneurial podcast. And really it's a reminder that revenue, profit, money, what is it? It's just a resource that then enables us to go out and reach more people and to better serve more people. So the fact that you as a scientist, Jared, I love that you so willingly talk about monetization and you introduce that as an important avenue because I think we all took academic books for granted. We don't know the funding sources. Those authors, I hope that they were paid along the way, but I know that if we could incentivize more scientists, more business people, more any subject matter expert with money to create more resources, we will inevitably have more resources. So Jared, walk us down that monetization path. I want to know, was it something that was immediately apparent to you and you were like, this is how we're going to monetize it? Is it something that's changed over time? Talk to us about your thoughts there.
Yeah, it honestly changed over time. So I will admit, I'll be the first to admit, I'm still that scientist at heart. And, ultimately, you think about the non-for-profit ways to go about it. But I was also, at that time, a U.S. Army scientist. What I ultimately wanted and was trying to find was a way to work with my business partners who were already on the outside, help them monetize it, and then have it be internally funded for myself as a scientist and still work for the U.S. Army. As I started to go down that path and really realize, is this a project I could work on within my career and basically, help it work externally from my career and not actually be part of the monetization? It was actually really, really difficult to find people that would fund it in that way. We talk in the government a lot about colors of money. And lots of times that's a crossover. That's almost like a no. That's like a roadblock. So I started to pitch the idea. As my business partners and I started to talk, we built a prototype, a demo that we could bring out, show people the power of virtual reality. So I can tell you right now about how awesome it is. It doesn't matter how much I tell you how awesome it is until you see it. Once you see what it is that we're building and have that early prototype, that's really one of those first steps. I can tell you a lot of people, especially a lot of really smart people in the science world, have amazing ideas. But to actually be able to see that in action and what it could actually turn into is a game changer. Once we started to show that to a variety of different people in that space, there was someone who said to me one day and said, "Why are you trying to do this from the government side? You have an amazing business idea here. You should really consider working from the outside and honestly being an entrepreneur." And I thought more to myself, and I was like, I already work like an entrepreneur. There are pieces I don't understand yet. The business side in particular, how to keep your books, how to keep the accounting, how to work with lawyers and those things. However, you can tap into lots and lots of resources depending on where you're at. Within your state probably has resources. In Maryland, we have something called the Maryland Tech Council that you can tap into, but there are also small business administration things that you can tap into to really help you get those going. And one of the early things that got told to me was there's a program called the I-Corps program. The I-Corps program is funded by the National Science Foundation, and it's really meant to help folks who have a good idea, and not just an idea from a theoretical perspective, but something that they could hopefully get into a prototype, and walk through customer discovery and whether it could really be something that can be monetized. And I can tell you, most of the people who are in this program with me, myself included, had never really gone through that exercise of talking to potential end users and decision makers about, does your product that you're looking at here really have viability within the market? Is there an ability to turn a profit on it? And what are some of those avenues that are out there? And as I went through this 6-week course, it really allowed me to kind of get out of my comfort zone. I'm not a salesman. I hate to ever be thought of as a salesman, but I had to kind of put on that hat at some point in time and really start to talk money, because like you talked about before, scientists don't like to talk about money. It's kind of a dirty word, and really understand whether our product could actually be monetized. What it allowed me to do over that period of time was not only realize that it could be monetized, but it allowed me to build an amazing network, and an amazing network of people that wanted to work with me. It wasn't now just a vendor relationship. It was a relationship of collaboration, and how did they help get us to the ultimate best product at the end of the day, which actually helps serve them. So to make a long story short, we were able to find a government adjacent industry, or government adjacent industry consortium that was willing to give us the initial money for development. And that's where we are right now. We're in our early stages of development, talking with a lot of our potential end customers about how they're going to buy our product on the back end, and really working in that full 360 degrees of entrepreneurial space.
Yeah, Jared, gosh, I love that scrappiness of finding resources and really assessing all of the different options out there, because you're right, there are so many different ways you can do it. It always reminds me of that commercial from Reese's. There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. We hear all of this advice within the world of business content, whether it's podcasts, YouTube videos, books, business school. And the truth is, there's so many different avenues for us to assess. So it is fun getting into the mind of a scientist, because I know that you approach problems, you approach opportunities with, a hypothesis in mind, and then you test the heck out of it to find the right solution. And I think that's important, especially when we talk about, I'm very excited to hear the way you personally think about go to market, because you've already pointed out, talking about it is one thing. When I try to explain to people how crazy the Apple Vision Pro is as a piece of software and hardware, you can't believe it. You can't understand it until you actually put that thing on your head and you see why they use the term spatial computing. It's something that didn't exist up to this point. So knowing that your product is something that has to be experienced, what's your go-to-market strategy here? Because we hear about terms like minimum viable product, but I want to hear the way a scientist approaches go-to-market.
Well, I think there's obviously a ton of different strategies here, but you have to consider who's your end user. For us, ultimately, we're a business to business sale. So we have to use our resources. For us, we are part of a consortium of industry called Biomade. We were actually out at their member meeting all week last week. It was at US Bank Stadium, which is the Minnesota Vikings Stadium, and I had people putting on our headset with a demo in mixed reality with the football field in the background. You want to change someone's perspective on what mixed and virtual reality can do, have them do it in very unique spaces. It was no longer a question for these people of, all right, is this something that we want in our program? But it was, how quick can you get it to us? How do we find funding to get there? And how do we work with you? And at the end of the day, I pointed at this before. Our ultimate success is in making collaborations and not just customers. So we look at our end customers as being members of industry, as being schools, 4-year and 2-year schools. So we have to work with them to figure out how to get ourselves paid, right? And that might seem a little weird, right? Usually you just go and it's very transactional. You say, I have a product to offer you. It's $500. They either say, I have $500 to give you, or they don't. With our end users, we take a little bit different approach, which is we want to work with you over the next X number of years. Let's say it's 5 years. We know that there are economic development opportunities in your area. How do we tap those economic development opportunities in your region to fund a mixed reality training? We can help get a certain number of people in your region up to speed and into jobs, which is a huge driver, obviously, for economic development. But on the kicker side of that is we're going to be utilizing some advanced technology. And you have to really pitch to them, what would it cost you to ultimately train these people by building real facilities and real training, hands-on training facilities, versus developing a virtual reality or mixed reality training scenario? And it's much different. And that's where we're really excited. And what we're doing is it's a new way of thinking about things. We don't just have the ability to put a website out there, put it on the Google Marketplace, have advertisers do all that for us. We have to do what you said before, the scrappiness. And honestly, I love that. That's the ability for us to go out there and change people's mindset about what these products can do. Like you said, you're an early adopter and have done the Apple Vision Pro. I don't know what the number of people are that have done the Apple Vision Pro is, but I'm sure it's less than 5% of the country. So not only do we have to show people that we have this product, we have to almost be their introduction to this entire industry and be kind of that agent of change and that agent of bringing this to the forefront, which is super cool. But ultimately, the other thing that's really fun is a lot of the people who will utilize our training are younger than myself. Technically, I'm a millennial. I'm a very elder millennial, but elder millennials and down in age. And these are the groups who feel comfortable utilizing these advanced technologies like virtual reality, obviously cell phones and apps and things along those lines. And we're meeting them where they're at. They are the end users, and they're the people that are most important in this training avenue. So ultimately, it's a much different model in how we get our funding, pay for the long-term viability of this program, and at the end, monetize what we're doing.
Yeah, Jared, I'll tell you what, hearing the way you talk about this stuff, it makes sense why we resonate, you and I, as millennials here who love this technology that's changing the world. Let's keep rolling with that example of the Apple Vision Pro. Typically, when Apple launches a product, we're used to millions of sales in the first 24 hours. Last thing I saw was they're talking hundreds of thousands of units rather than millions. And so you talk about being on the forefront, the cutting edge of technology. This is part of the change that I so admire the fact that you're doing this work with. And so hearing you talk not only about the short term, but about the long term, it really shows not just the scientist in you, but I love with that entrepreneurial hat on as a business owner now, hearing your viewpoints on timeline, on growth, on where you are today and where you want to be. So with all of that in mind, I always love asking fellow entrepreneurs, what is that timeline that you look at? Are you looking at this as a 5-year thing, a 10-year thing? Obviously the answer is you want to be doing this forever and changing lives. But with your strategic business owner hat on, I'm curious what sort of time horizons you're planning towards, you're taking action towards, and how you're navigating that.
That's a fantastic question because it needs to be to all of them. But, what do we spend maybe our largest percentage of our time thinking about in development? We're still in development. So lots of times I'm thinking, what are we doing this week? What are we doing this month? And what are we doing in the next 6 months? And that's really important. But from the business side, it's a lot of that 3 to 5 year horizon. Not only what are we going to be doing 3 to 5 years out from now, but what does our what can we do to position ourselves today to be successful in that 3 to 5 year time frame? So when we're thinking about what do we want to look like in 3 to 5 years, we want to have obviously grown beyond where we are now. It's not just in money, but it's also it's not just in revenue, but it's also obviously in number of employees, people who are using our product, recognition within the field, and all of those types of things. And they can't happen overnight as much as we want them to. You can get sparks overnight, but you can't make, that groundswell movement in that period of time. But in the science world, things don't typically happen that fast. The public might think that they do, and they might see them as things that happen really fast. But I can tell you a lot of things that I was working for when I was working for the Army. We were developing technologies that we were thinking maybe fielded in the next 15 to 20 years. And that's kind of interesting to have to think in that perspective, but you can't have that length of a timeline in anything that you're going to obviously be building business-wise. So what we have to think about is, all right, what funding do we have now? How long can that last us? And at what point do we need to be able to no longer be really finding other non-dilutive sources of funding, which I think are very important? When do we think about finding other dilutive sources of funding, which is something that is obviously very exciting, but requires us to be thinking more business strategically, which might be beyond some of our expertise at this point. So how do we pull in partners to help us with that? How do we pull in advisors? And building, and I've probably said it way too many times, but I don't think you actually can say it too many times. It's all about building your network, and it's all about building that community and those people who are willing to collaborate with you and talk to you, and pick up that phone anytime that you want to call them, right? And that I think was really, really important for us. So a lot of people who are starting out on an entrepreneurial path might not have that long Rolodex in their industry yet. So how do you go out and find that? Luckily for me, I was already pretty well established into the biomanufacturing community and had people I could call and talk to and have instant reputability when I picked up the phone with them. But if you're starting out on your entrepreneurial path and it's a new place, and maybe it's a place that's a little bit diluted, right? So you have to find like what that path ultimately is. And maybe it's not on a national scale. Maybe it starts in a more local or more regional scale, and building that up and finding those people who can help build you up, finding those champions for your product. That's another thing that's really important for us, is finding people who are well respected in the field, who are willing to talk positively about what we do. And I'm not talking about hiring someone who's obviously a spokesperson. I'm talking about people who really truly like what you're doing. And then when they go out to another conference or another meeting or whatever it is, they're talking organically about what it is that you're putting out. And I think like that's a really, really important aspect as well.
Gosh, Jared, you are sharing the real stuff here in today's podcast episode. I'm so appreciative of how generous you are in sharing these things, because for me, hearing you talk about the importance of networking, my gut reaction, the question I wanted to ask you was, well, how do we go about doing that, Jared? But you shared it. It really comes from having your finger on the pulse of your industry. And I think what's really revealing to me about the way you talk about your business is your ability to zoom in and out. You're talking both micro and macro. And I think that's so important. You give us that time horizon from within the world of science, 10 to 15 years out, and having that ability to look at those macro trends and at least know directionally where things are going. But then on a micro level, I love your focusing on even a week, a month, 6 months out makes it super actionable. So hearing the way that your mind thinks, Jared, that's what's behind everything we do here at the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. It also means, though, with you dropping so many knowledge bombs and advice and strategies on us here today, I have no idea how you're going to answer this last question, which is, what's your one actionable takeaway for listeners who are sitting here thinking, gosh, this is a brilliant way to approach business. We've talked about funding. We've talked about new technologies. We've talked about, I think it's really important, and I just want to echo it, how embedded your ideal customer is in the development, let alone the future sales and all of that. So, Jared, with all of that in mind, what's the takeaway you want for listeners today?
Ultimately, the takeaway is you have to find something you're passionate about, what you love, well, that overlaps what you're good with, right? And where that intersection, and I think I started early on about talking about ikigai and that overlap and that need of existence. And we all want to start out working in the things that we love. No one wants to work in a job that they hate. But ultimately, you need to find that overlap of those four things: the what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, right? Just because you can build a product doesn't mean the world needs it, and what you can be paid for. And when you're missing one of those four pieces, you need to go back and iterate. It really is hypothesis driven, and I love that you picked up on that, Brian. The fact that it's hypothesis driven is the fact that you can go in there and ask yourself, what am I missing? What are the questions that I can ask myself and my business to really be the agent of change for what it is that I'm doing? And if you're not constantly asking yourselves those questions, if you're not challenging yourself on a daily basis, you're not going to be able to build ultimately the product you want, the business you want, and be as successful as you want. But once you do, and once you have that passion, we always talk about the job you having not being work and being a passion and being something you love. That's how you find it, and that's going to drive you to build what you're doing, be passionate about it, talk to it about anyone or to anyone. I always say science is really hard because I can't talk to what I do lots of times with my friends or my family. But this, now that I have found kind of that thing that I really, really understand and love, it's really easy to dissect and tell others about what you do. So, actionable item at the end of the day: be a scientist, hypothesize, test it, and challenge yourself.
Yes, I love that, Jared. That was not just some strategic insights, entrepreneur to entrepreneur, but that is really a call to action for all of you listeners worldwide. I absolutely love that advice and the direction you took that in. Jared, I know that I'm personally very excited to follow your journey from here. Obviously, I'm a bit of a tech geek, so the technology element of your business is incredible to me, and I'm so excited to see all the things that you and your business partners develop from here. So for listeners who want to go deeper into this world, drop those links on us. Where should they go from here?
The best place to find what we're doing is usually LinkedIn. I love to post on there what we're doing, where we're going. You can find access to our website from there as well, how we're developing things that are changing rapidly. I don't want to go into it too much, but from the business side and the business aspects, you learn right as you go, and we've had to restructure our company from different aspects that we've learned and things like that. So yeah, follow on LinkedIn, XpeRience Science. We also have Prism Immersive, which is our restructuring, which you can follow that as well. But ultimately, I post a lot of things from my own LinkedIn page, and that's where you can follow the journey of what we're doing.
Yes, listeners, you already know the drill. We are making it as easy as possible for you to find Jared, as well as his business pages on LinkedIn, as well as all the links we are dropping down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So definitely check those out. We personally came across Jared on LinkedIn, and he is not kidding when he says that he is active there, sharing so much goodness, not just what he's doing, but I love the fact that Jared really shares so many developmental things in the world that he's watching and that are clearly playing a role in the way that he thinks, not only as a scientist, but as an entrepreneur. So, Jared, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me so much. This was fantastic.